Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. Alan Miller here, and one of our favorite guests, and a frequent guest, Honorable Paul Anderson, Minnesota Supreme Court retired. And we're going to talk about several things. As we were going into the programming for this program, Justice Anderson was coming in for a second interview, for the second 30-minute interview. And I was prepared to do a review of the election in the first 30-minute presidential election we're talking about interview. We're combining the two, and welcome.
Pleasure to be back, Alan. I'm ready for your incisive questions.
I just wanted to say we're in our 18th year here at Access to Democracy, which is certainly one of the longest running interview programs in the state, if not the longest. And we wouldn't really have this show at all if it weren't for our volunteers, the people who come in, who you don't see, who are behind the scenes and make this show go. And
I want to mention that you are very good at always, when I appear as a guest, whatever, bringing your volunteers in and giving them credit. Maybe that's the reason they keep showing up, because they know that you appreciate their efforts on this show.
Well, I recognized long ago that I'm just a pretty face, but they're the ones who make this go. They turn the wheels. So particularly...
I won't comment about the pretty face statement.
Mary Dahlke has been with us for about 13 years. Paul Hoffinger has been with us for several years. Raven Miller, no relation, and he makes sure to point that out, who is now directing today, has been here for several years. We have Joni Preston out there, who's been with us this last year. We have two Jeffs, one on the Eagan staff full-time, Ongstadt, and one who helps out frequently, Anderson. And the Eagan staff, the Eagan City. One of the things I'm going to
interrupt you here for a moment. You know, one of the things they're doing is preparing themselves to answer what I call is the legacy question. Time comes when their grandchildren or whatever come and say, Grandma, Grandpa, what did you do to make things better? What did you do to inform the world? And they can come and say, well, we have this wonderful historic record put together by Access and Democracy, and we helped make it work. So that's
absolutely true.
They're preparing themselves to answer that question.
I want to give a big shout out and thank you to the City of Eagan government, because the city, in conjunction with Thomson Reuters, where we are now, and Rick King, who's flying back from Switzerland at the moment, of Thomson Reuters, but the city through two city managers, Hodges and the current one, Ongstad, not Ongstad, whatever, I blanked on a name.
It gets to be a problem as we get older, right?
Dave Osberg.
Yeah, the name comes to you, but it doesn't come as quick, does it, sir?
That's all right.
Last
night
that.
I was trying to think of the name of a singer who was involved in some sort of a skirmish. About 4 hours later it came to me. But the city has made this possible, and they have been so good, such good shepherds of this show. Certainly Mr. Garrison, the communications director, is part and parcel of that. But the city government here, over the years, going back to when Pat Anderson was mayor, we have no politics. Even though we have people from different political parties, they have dedicated themselves to really running the city and doing the best for the people. Would that we could have that on a national level with our Congress, both in the Senate and the House. We don't, and it's really sad. But certainly I just wanted to mention that because we don't talk about it enough. And from Pat Anderson right through the mayors and the police departments right up to Mike McGuire and the council members, they have made this much easier for us.
It's good that you mention that because as a society, a civil society, we need to be reminded from time to time what makes it work, what makes it better for us. And I'm glad you are saying a thank you to the people who are making this work.
And we also have a very favorable tax rate here in Eagan, which is burgeoning with some really wonderful new developments over the last several years. So it's just something that you're absolutely right, doesn't get mentioned often enough, and I wanted to mention it. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Capitol restoration, because you were a member of the commission, and I think things are winding down to the point where it's concluded.
Well, not exactly. Now, when I was on the court, I was the court's representative on the commission, and afterwards I was co-chair of the committee looking at art in the Capitol. And it's not one, the restoration process is coming toward the end, but the end is going to be quite interesting, is that the Capitol will reopen for use in January when the legislature, but everything in the restoration will not be done. The planned grand opening is for fall of 2017. And there's two things to keep in mind that are a concern here. One, the restoration itself and the magnificence of that building standing alone, art aside, is going to be awesome. And people will have to just go in there to see it and appreciate it themselves. But
it's a beautiful Capitol.
It is
absolutely
beautiful. There will be, and I don't want to diminish it, but the collateral question is going to be how we deal with what would be, I call, movable art within the Capitol. And that's yet unresolved. And there will be some continued controversy. The CAP board has just recently weighed in. The Historical Society is asked to submit recommendations. The commission will be meeting the end of November. And what I will tell the people is stay tuned. Some very important decisions will be being made in the next couple of months.
And be alert and be a voice.
Yes. And
by all means.
And to keep an open mind, because there will be some decisions that people like, some that they won't.
Well, you have been the author of several articles in the Star Tribune over the last couple of months, one of which surprised a lot of people when you said you were casting your vote for Hillary Clinton. It didn't surprise me, having seen the way your mind works over the years and knowing what a conscience that you have, that you made that choice. On the other hand, there was no doubt where I was going to be in that election, although I started out with Bernie Sanders, and I particularly was upset with the way he was treated by the Democratic National Committee as long ago as last Christmas, when I said that Debbie Wasserman Schultz should be thrown off the DNC chairship and new blood should be moved in, because they really created an unlevel playing field for Bernie Sanders.
Well, you've touched on a lot of things, and let's start with the endorsement of Hillary Clinton. I have to concede that I have at best a tepid supporter of Secretary Clinton, but in our election system it comes down to a choice to be, right between two people. More than 18 months ago, I talked to a rather powerful person in the Democratic Party of Minnesota nationally. I said, can't you find someone other than Clinton who will be more popular? And the answer was that if you can find somebody who can raise a couple of $1 billion for a campaign, I would maybe agree with you, but she had the establishment behind her. Interestingly enough, in my own family, is that my wife and I were at Loggerhills and that. I mean, even to the point she questioned about my decision being made based on gender. Gender had nothing to do with it. Electability and the future of the country. My favorite was Joe Biden.
He would have probably won going away, and he would have been a terrific president. He chose not to put his name in, so we went to Bernie. I was not a Hillary supporter because the Clintons come with a lot of baggage, and it only got worse during this election.
The interesting thing, there were probably two factors with Joe Biden. One is that he really was deeply wounded by the death of his son, Beau. And second is that, I've lost a daughter. I know how painful it is to go through the loss of a child. And that, together with having to mount a presidential campaign in this atmosphere of vitriol and whatever, just probably dissuaded him.
If somebody would have just gotten him to learn how to Twitter, he might have been able to forge a campaign.
So I'm going to ask you a question. One of the big issues facing the Democratic Party going forward are people like yourself who are Bernie Sanders supporters. What are you going to do now as the party goes forward? Because the Democratic Party is polarized, and there are divisions. And what are the Bernie Sanders people going to do?
Well, they are, I think, invigorated by the fact that we also have Senator Warren in that camp, and we have some real progressives. And it looks like everybody has thrown their support behind Keith Ellison, our Muslim representative from Minnesota, to head the DNC. I think Keith will be active. I think he will be innovative. I think he will be energetic. And his politics and mine are
Let me be devil's advocate for you okay. I looked at the map of Minnesota, rural metro split. I look at the electoral map of the United States. You've got far west, you've got the northeast, and you got a tier in is that you got to get the white working class back to the Democratic Party. Are you going to be able to do it? I'm a big fan of Keith's, by the way.
I think that he is a person
he is
who
African American Muslim, seeking to bring in a broader base to the party. Is he going to be able to do that?
I think he can, because he headed the progressive wing of the party, and we had all ethnicities there, and they came in. And they worked energetically, and they worked for Hillary energetically when Bernie was no longer, and he was one of the early Bernie supporters, was no longer there. So I do believe with Senator Schumer and Keith and some other new faces that we will energize. And Senator Schumer in particular, I think, can take the measure of President-elect Trump.
Okay, now let me ask you a question. You're a native New Yorker, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
And so looking at this article, he said you have two New York fellows going to engage in a struggle, Queens and Brooklyn. I think Trump is Queens, Schumer is Brooklyn. How how is that going to play out? You know New Yorkers. That's above my pay grade. How's that going to play out?
My father is from Brooklyn, but even more than that, my grandfather, who was originally from Russia, was from Brooklyn. And you wouldn't want to mess with my grandfather. You don't want to mess with Chuck Schumer.
People from Brooklyn are tougher than people from Queens?
That's what I'm saying, yes.
But now, wasn't Archie Bunker from Queens?
That might be, but Archie Bunker was a figment of somebody's imagination. And Chuck Schumer is real.
How do you think that's going to play out with Trump and Schumer?
I think he's going to be very challenging. And I think
Schumer will be challenged.
Yeah, even as we get to talk about Trump, I think that some of the things that Trump projects, he's going to need the Democrats to work with, because the Republicans will resist, for instance, advances in our crumbling infrastructure. But the Democrats want to spend the money for it. Schumer is there. The president is there at this moment, although he changes his mind too often to please me. But the president-elect, I should say, because we still have, fortunately, Obama for the next 2 months. But I do think that he will be able to work with Democrats on some things like that.
Now, I'm going to turn the tables on you, because the opposite could be true also. And I would look to what will senators like Jeff Flake from Arizona, Susan Collins from Maine, and even Lindsey Graham from North Carolina said there's a time to put country above party.
They certainly did.
And it will be interesting to see what they do in this whole new mix.
Well, there were 6 or 7 Republican senators who did just that and did not endorse Trump.
But that's changed. He's now the president-elect. And I mean, I'll be very frank with you. There was a time when people said that Republicans just won't show up and vote for Trump. But there's a rule in politics that party is so strong, and it's shown that not only did Republicans show up for Trump, he was able to capture a new class.
Well, he did, and a lot of them were Democrats. And remember also that 100 million people who might have voted didn't vote because they were displeased with both candidates. And at this point in the popular vote, Hillary Clinton is probably ahead by about 1.5 million votes. So it's really an enigma, but the Electoral College is going to make that
I'm going to digress
decision
here a little bit and talk about something that's important to Minnesota and really to me, and that is voter suppression. I mean, we have a lot of self-disenfranchisement where people just don't show up. But it will be shown that in those states where they have enacted rather restrictive voting requirements, is that the voting from those people was down about 2%. That could have made a difference in Pennsylvania.
It certainly could have.
Now, Minnesota needs to be proud. Our margin here was 1.5%, but we did not put in the oppressive voter ID. But that's going to have a long-term effect on voter turnout.
And with a new, very conservative judge on the U.S. Supreme Court, whom I'm assuming will be nominated by Trump, I guess Merrick Garland's chance of going to the court is gone, which is a real shame. But we will see. Otherwise, we have to deal with voter suppression on a state-by-state basis. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is citizen involvement and some of the things we can do. Now, one of the things that really struck me within the last week, although I am always conscious of it in November, is in 1938, 78 years ago, Kristallnacht started really the Nazi oppression in World War II. What happened in Kristallnacht was it was pre-planned in Germany and Austria. 367 synagogues were torched. 90 people were killed. Just about every Jewish business establishment was destroyed, looted. Books were set on fire. 30,000 people were sent to a concentration camp, although some were released within several weeks. And I heard that Trump is going forward with the Muslim registration and the Muslim immigrants not being able to get into this country. And it reminded me so much of Kristallnacht. And it reminded me of some terrible mistakes that this country has made, including the internment of the Japanese Americans in World War II, one of the great blemishes in our history. In fact, I heard someone on television describe it as the worst blemish on our history. I don't think so. I think taking this country away from the Native Americans and relegating them in many, many instances to second status citizens is the worst thing that America has ever done.
Can I intervene here?
Please.
A couple of things. I mean, there was a certain inevitability to the Western European expansion in North America. What is so terrible is that what was done to the Native Americans, and there was a policy of actual extermination and to remove them. I can get into all of that, but what the main point you're making here is that I think I don't want to re-debate these issues, whatever. So we need to understand history so that it'll inform us, so some of the things won't happen here. And I'm going to tell you something that, you're Jewish, aren't you?
I am, sir.
For the longest period of time, it's very interesting in my own thing is that I have a number of friends who I'm casually Jewish, but I never thought of them until recently in the context that they have a Jewish background. What has arisen with the hate and the vitriol and trying to find a boogeyman everywhere, I'm starting to be concerned about my friends based upon their ethnic and religious background, that it could be, so you mentioned the Muslims, but where is it going to stop?
That remains to be seen, because what I am advocating to Republicans who I've spoken to, someone get a hold of Trump and get him to tell these people to back off. There's been a tremendous incidence of anti-Semitism. And, I sort of roll it off my back because I grew up with it. I have been around long enough to have lived through World War II. I've seen members of my family go to war. And as a result of that, I became very conscious of the treatment of the Jews going back for the centuries. And I even taught a Holocaust course for 6 years at Inver Hills. One of the great experiences of my life. And people don't know about these things, so we really have to enlighten them.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I actually spoke on this at the Human Rights Commission as far back as 2008 when they asked me to talk about the United States in a post-racial era. I refused to talk on that because I said it's not a post-racial era, and I even predicted that things racially would get more heated and more vitriol. And that's shown to be true. So what we have, citizens, and I was glad that Trump said this on 60 Minutes. I think he said it, I paraphrase, is stop the hatred. There is so much hatred out there that has been unleashed, so many different quarters. And I'll be very frank, some think that they are now empowered and entitled to be that way and to express their hatred and talk about others in a very nasty way. And what citizens need to do, and in conversations and somebody says, just stop, please. We're all Americans. If we are going to face the challenges in the future, we got to end this hatred and vitriol.
Well, it's got to start at the top, though. And a very poor decision that Trump made was picking Bannon as his chief of staff, or not his chief of staff, but his top advisor.
Top policy advisor, I think, is the
whatever it is.
Top policy advisor.
This is a man who has a history, not a long ago history, but a consistent history of
come on, say it. Say
violence,
it right out. He's been labeled as a white supremacist.
He is a white supremacist.
And he views the, if you're not Caucasian, white, as you're being inferior. That is a very dangerous placing of a person of those views in the proximity to the president.
Also categorizing immigrants. We are all immigrants. The Native Americans are the only people who were here, and look what we've done to them. We moved into their country. Granted, it's a magnificent country. You don't have to make America great again.
I'm a dumb
America is great.
I'm a dumb Norwegian and a root eater, you know. That's how they used to refer to my Norwegian ancestors, as dumb Norwegians, because we tend to be reticent, and they called us root eaters because we survived on a lot. I mean, or it was the dirty Irish in St. Paul. And
it's interesting to me that you've gone back to your roots since you retired from the court, because I just saw a picture of a ditch that you dug and part of a deck that you rebuilt. So it's not what I would have anticipated.
Well,
I would have
anticipated
kid. You in. I know you're a farm kid. But I would have anticipated you teaching in law school
it's one
and
of
not digging a ditch.
It's one of the curses of my life, is that I can do just about anything. I don't get too much into electrical work because I could kill myself that way. But the other stuff, I mean, you grow up on a farm, you learn how to do these things. So I get asked to do these things, and you know, okay. This is one of the areas in life you can find some satisfaction, you know, building something and seeing the end product. I mean, that's going to, I'm going to turn this back as one of the things that was an issue in this campaign was the economics. We are a country that builds things. We have a strong history of working class. And with the economic changes coming, there's a sense of malaise if we lost our way. And I think that surfaced in this election.
We've let it get away from us, and I blame the Democrats as well as the Republicans in this regard. Our election system is so, I don't know, disparate, false, wrong. People who are representatives in the House have one function. They have to raise $10,000 a week so they can perpetuate themselves.
You got it.
In the Senate, it's even far more than that. If we didn't have lobbyists, if we didn't have ALEC writing legislation, if we didn't have a year-and-a-half election campaigns and restricted it to 6 weeks like the British do, with no outside money coming in, we could restore ourselves and regain a lot of what we have lost. I'm probably whistling in the dark, but there's a solution right there.
Now, this is one of the most, it just kind of was an offhand comment, but it stuck with me and has really kind of shook me to my core. Someone said, looking at our election system, whatever, and the statement was, if this is democracy, I don't want any part of it. If that is an emerging attitude or an existing attitude with respect to our election process, is if this is democracy, I don't want any part of it. That is very scary, and you're right. We've got to do something to change that.
And I don't know how we do that unless, well, we'll talk about getting people involved, but that's really what we have to do. We have to start at the ground roots level.
Well, you just contradicted yourself, and I'm going to come back. And and I don't think you're necessarily that inconsistent. When we were talking about removing the hateful attitude and the vitriol, you say it has to start from the top. But now you're talking about our election system and how we choose the people leaders. You say it's got to start at the bottom. So what do you mean here, Alan?
Those are not inconsistencies.
Well, I gave you that.
I want Trump to come out, and I want him to say he's not going to register Muslims, and they are welcome in this country. And we've had, even recently, several Muslim imams on this program. These people want nothing more than what we have and what we have generated here. But I think you have to cut the snake's head off at the top. And I think I'm waiting for Trump to say, no, we will not countenance this, and we will prosecute, and go back into the holes that you came from, and put your hoods back on, KKK, because we don't want to recognize you, we don't want to see you. Go away. Don't have parades in North Carolina celebrating anti-diversity.
So, but now let's get the other piece of what you're saying. It's not inconsistent. You're talking about the grassroots movement. What are you addressing there? What are you focusing on?
I'm focusing on people like Keith Ellison. I am focusing on the Paul Wellstones, the late Paul Wellstones. I am focusing on good people who have not been in politics, who see.
They are in politics.
Those people are, but I'm focusing on the people who are not in politics, who throw up their hands and say there's nothing I can do, to convince them, yes, there is something you can do.
Now, you've left off a couple of names, and I don't want you to do this. You left off the name of Tom Emmer, and you left off the name of Jeff Paulson. And I think that,
there are many more around the country.
Yeah, and there are many others. I mean, we got to look to those people to providing leadership. I was very proud of Tom Emmer. It was a recent opinion. I heard it on NPR. He was up in St. Cloud. And St. Cloud is a hotbed of hate and racial turmoil. And he was approached by a group, the leader of a group, that was complaining about Muslims coming in the country and taking their jobs and whatever. And he stood up and he said, no. He said, this is the American experience. They are here legally. They are benefiting from our society and contributing to it. That is our history. And I will have no part of condemning people coming and what you're doing. I was very proud of Emmer.
John McCain did something similar when somebody at a rally 4 years ago yelled that Obama is a Muslim, and he stood up
right here in Minnesota,
and he said no,
yeah.
And took that woman to task.
So the point here is, I've heard some discussions, Norm Ornstein and others. I mean, there's no precedent for what we're going through right now. I mean, even going back to Andrew Jackson, it was different and whatever. And we need to really depend on the resiliency of our country. And that's going to take all of us,
Certainly
to focus,
is this next 4 years.
To focus on Doug Head, who was a Republican Attorney General, left me with, I always remember, said, no, you always focus on the donut, Paul, not the hole. And we've had a lot of focusing on the hole lately. And is one of the things we have to do as a country. Let's focus on the donut. Let's focus on what is meaningful, what is going to make our country in the image that we want it to be. And so that's the challenge out there. And that's part of where you're saying that has to come from the grassroots and the core.
You know, people have to sit back and take a look at what's going to happen over these next several months. And you'll see whether Trump has the ability to rise to the occasion, or whether he's going to hide behind his Twitter machine, not have press conferences, and just react really adversely to anybody who says anything derogatory about him, even if it's factually correct. And I mean, I knew that I couldn't vote for Trump the minute that he mocked that disabled reporter, because of all the transgressions of Trump, and I can go through dozens of them here because I compiled them for this interview.
We know most of them.
That bothered me the most because that shows such a lack of character. I don't know if we're going to build character in a 70-year-old man who is narcissistic, who possibly is psychologically deranged.
I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to repeat both Hillary Clinton and President Obama. I mean, in this initial stage,
give them a chance.
Give them a chance to keep an open mind. But what you disappoint me on, Alan, today is you haven't brought up Comey or Sessions, and
let's
things
talk
that are
about
relevant to the.
As we were walking down the hall, I mentioned that Mitt Romney is meeting with Trump, I think, tomorrow, and allegedly will be offered the position of Secretary of State. Of all the names that have come forward so far, that one is far and above anyone else.
Well, Mitt Romney is a classy person, but then I gotta reveal my history. I was a big fan of his father. Governor Romney of Michigan, and I liked him a lot. And I mean, he got savaged in the system, but his father was a very good person, and I don't think that the apple has fallen too far from the tree with respect to Mitt Romney. So that is an encouraging thing if that does indeed happen. Because, I mean, whether you think America needs to be great again or not, I think we are great. And I've done a lot of international travel, right, and we are idealized and whatever. But the world is really worried about what we're going to do. And I think that a Mitt Romney, given his background and whatever, would instill some international confidence. Because, you know,
he has a certain prestige, and he has run for president, and he was violently anti-Trump, not physically violently, but certainly in what he had to say. And if, in fact, Trump can induce him to become Secretary of State, and it happens, that is one step forward on many, many steps that we have to take. Now, you mentioned Jeff Sessions, Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, and you have your own take on him, being offered the head of the, CIA? What did he offer?
Oh, no, he's going to be...
Secretary of State.
No, he's going to be Attorney General.
Oh, Attorney General. I'm wrong.
Now,
Attorney General.
That is a cause of concern to me. I mean, I hope that Senator Sessions has changed some from the 30 years when he was up to be appointed as a federal judge and was found unqualified because he was referred to African Americans as boy and other derogatory terms. He was found to have said that white lawyers who brought civil rights cases were unpatriotic, as was the NAACP and the ACLU. And so the Justice Department has control of so many levels, levers, including the U.S. district attorneys, which will be up for, and they vet the appointees to district court positions. I mean, there is some Senate control or influence with respect to federal district court, but all appellate, circuit positions, whatever.
Circuit Court of Appeals.
Those go through, I mean, those are handled internally by the Justice Department. So what his views are, and this gets to voters' rights, the civil rights enforcement. Can I get back on a little bit of history? I mean, people have mixed views of Richard Nixon. I mean, he's had some very nasty things to talk about African Americans, others, but I mean, by the way,
Jews as well.
But you know, he was very good on Native American rights. You know, is that there was given a choice, and he's the one that started this policy of empowering Native Americans and so there's good. But there's another thing. A good friend of mine graduated from law school in '68, and then went to work for the Justice Department in the Civil Rights Division. Mitchell, Attorney General Mitchell was, and I asked him, what was the attitude of the Attorney General and how to treat? He said he gave us absolutely free hand to do the right thing as we went into the South and dealt with the Bull Connors of the world. He said, we took on people like this who were so overtly oppressive, and the Attorney General would back us. I don't know as we're going to get that same thing from Jeff Sessions.
I don't know, but what you're talking about, again, giving people a chance, that was 25 years ago. I can only hope that he has grown, maybe even more, maybe 30 years ago, that he has grown.
1986 was when he had the hearings. In
stature, that he has grown in his understanding of the world and the country. Let's give him a chance.
I mean, this is so interesting, because will he be in the Attorney General position and say, this is my opportunity to get even, to strike back? Or will he approach it with, I am now at this very, very important high level, and it's time to do like his now Senate colleague Lindsey Graham said, put country over patriotism? We don't know.
We don't know. And we don't know, what was the other name that you mentioned you want to talk about?
Well, I wanted to talk about is that another thing will be there are people I talked about earlier, like senators like Jeff Flake, who I like, and Susan Collins and Lindsey Graham, very definitely Republican, but also is that how they will strike a balance in the Senate. That'll be, and also another very interesting thing to watch is Chief Justice John Roberts.
He's very interested in his legacy.
Oh, yes.
And probably more than anything. And we have seen him cross the line several times on big cases. And I do think that he will put forward a middle-of-the-road hand position in terms of the Supreme Court.
It's hopeful. I mean, I'm going to bring up a name from history, Chief Justice Roger Taney, author of the Dred Scott decision, which was a terrible decision in classified. And you mentioned legacy. Now, Taney was not a bad jurist in many senses of the word. But what do we remember Roger Taney for?
The Dred Scott decision.
And
right.
There are very few people that serve in that position of Chief Justice. And they call it. I mean, it was the Warren Court, it was the Berger Court, now it's the Roberts Court.
Yeah, and we have things, of course, like Citizens United, which has reared its ugly head. The fact that the court said that there was not racism in the states as they gutted the Civil Rights Act. I think that he may rethink some of these things.
We got to hope so. But the interesting thing is that he will be tested in a way that I would guess he never thought he would be tested in this environment. And again, we just have to be there and hope and keep an open mind and hope that these very good patriotic Americans, and they are, will rise to the occasion and say is that who we are as an American people and what's important, and we'll just have to see.
You know, I'm a 19-year Minnesotan, and
God, you're an immigrant, aren't you?
Yes, I am, and I couldn't be prouder of this state and most of the people.
Yeah, but New Yorkers are bringing such a terrible influence with them, don't they?
Well, fortunately, I lived all over the country as a kid.
Oh, okay.
Including a year and a half in Minnesota when I was a copy boy in college over summers working for the Star Tribune. Well, actually, in those days, it was just the Morning Tribune.
Yeah.
The Star was the afternoon paper. But, you know, I also, because my family moved around a lot, I lived in Chicago. I lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I lived in St. Petersburg.
You truly are a cosmopolitan American, aren't you?
St. Petersburg, Florida, Austin, Texas, Queens, that you mentioned for a short period of time. A lot of years.
But your ties are to Brooklyn,
Long
right?
Island. My tie.
Oh, your tie. Oh, did I inadvertently bring up this artistic work that you have brought to your show?
Done by an immigrant, as a matter of fact, who is one of the top recognized modern painters of the day, Dominic Pangborn. And so my exposure in terms of my childhood into really my adult years is much wider than a lot of people. As I speak to some people and say, I have to go to New York sometime, and they haven't been out of Minnesota. And I said, well, we've got to expand your horizons. Yes, when I was in Florida as a kid, I actually had somebody ask me when I was leaving for a Jewish holiday, I think Yom Kippur or one of those, my parents being a little bit more religious than I am, one of my classmates said, you can't be a Jew, you don't have horns. Now, I had never heard that before, but, you know, that is some of the type of prejudice, and I got into several fistfights when we moved to Long Island in a community that didn't have a very big Jewish population. So
now I'm going to, I was talking to a friend last night and asked what she's reading, and she said, well, I'm to re-energize myself, I'm reading the speeches and the thing of Winston Churchill. I'm actually reading John Weatherford's book on Genghis Khan. But Genghis Khan actually was quite a visionary leader. I mean, his empire ultimately stretched from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. But one of the things that was the hallmark of his rule, other than meritocracy, was complete religious freedom. He was actually persecuted by the old rules of kinship and what you believed in. And when he was in one of his worst down times, he looked at those who were around him, who were his supporters. They were friends, and they were Mongols who worshiped the sky. They were Buddhists, they were Muslims, and they were Christians. And so when he really came and consolidated his power, he not only was tolerant with respect to religions, he was supportive of the equality of various religions. And is that we...
Allegedly we are too, but certainly we've been tested over the last several weeks.
And we have to re-examine where we are on this issue. And maybe there's a lesson going back as far as the 12th and 13th century to Genghis Khan is that his power came from his viewing not parochially this issue, but seeing it on a broad basis, is seeing the commonality of the human nature and the commonality of religion.
Looking at his army, he said, I don't care what religion you follow, as long as you go out and conquer and kill and maim.
And follow me.
Right.
Yeah. But, I mean, there's some lessons there.
Now, getting back to this.
Boy, this is far-ranging, isn't it?
It is.
We're talking Genghis Khan and...
We might have to go 2 hours.
No, we can't do that.
But talking about really things like the Supreme Court and some of the things that Trump has said that I hope he moderates away from. The construction of a wall and making Mexicans pay for it, ludicrous.
It's not going to happen.
And
they won't pay for it for sure.
No, for sure. He sort of backed off of that, and he said, well, he'd accept a wall that was chain link fencing in some places. But the wall's not going to happen, I don't think.
I'll give you an example. Okay, my neighbor used to store all kinds of kind of messy stuff between our yard and now walls do have, or fences do have, some bench. There's no way I would have told gotten my neighbor to build a fence to blot out
and make him pay for it.
And make him pay for it. But I built a fence and paid for it myself, and I mean, realizing this, I'm not going to get him to pay for it. And if I want it, I've got to do it myself. And then when I did it, I didn't make it go the whole, only just as far as I needed to cover up what I considered the ugly stuff, and left the rest open, and we have a good relationship. Not a good metaphor, but it applies a little bit.
So I think the nation is really being tested right now. It shouldn't have been that way, but it is that way. Now, I have been reading and talking to people, and I've read a lot of columns in the last couple of weeks that said Trump will be impeached within a year. He'll never last out a full term.
Don't underestimate Trump.
And Trump, when he started, this is just what people said. He's never going to make it to the primaries. He's never going to make it to the nomination. He's never going to make it to the... He has a way of perpetuating himself. So I don't buy any of that. What I'm hoping is that he surrounds himself with some advisors who are wise enough to recognize, and of course there are differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, between the Republicans and
You need to hope that he's able to grow in the position.
And people have grown in the presidency.
Yes. Hey, I'm a good example. I could see myself grow as I was in the court. But here's, I mean, if
we should mention that you were nominated by Governor Arnie Carlson when you were very involved in Republican politics.
But I do not tolerate very well people who talk about impeachment and whatever, because that is a dysfunctional thing. I mean, and I won't even. There are people that go where as far as saying what I would think would be treasonous things, and I said, if you mean what you say, I'm going to have to report you. I mean, it's that level of anger and whatever. No, we've got to stop that. Don't talk about that way. What we got to do is to give a bit of time, open mind, and hope that President-elect Trump will grow in that position and help preserve. I did not buy into his "Make America Great Again" because he was really denigrating a country that I think is great.
And many people who are great. I mean, starting with John McCain, for instance, even though I don't agree with him on philosophically on a lot of things.
Let's hope he grows so that he understands that he needs to help and act to preserve what we have, which is something magnificent.
Well, he doesn't do a lot of reading, but I might send him a DVD of you and I talking here. And maybe there's an outside chance he would watch it.
Oh, I don't think.
And
we're just a little fly speck in the far reaches of his universe.
One never knows.
One never knows.
I am available to head right into Washington.
Maybe as a fellow New Yorker, he might listen to you.
Maybe. I've never been at a dinner in the White House, so maybe
Nor have I.
Maybe it's time. I don't know. And so many things we haven't talked about that we could talk about.
Let's talk about Comey just for a minute.
Okay.
I mean, this
big mistake.
Big mistake
from a man who has a rather impressive background,
and by all accounts and purposes, a nice person, whatever. But I mean, this is part of the surrealistic aspect. One of the many surrealistic aspects of this whole election. You have Comey, who is charged with doing the investigation of Hillary Clinton on the emails, which is a put-up deal and whatever. Now, she's stupid the way she handled her emails.
Absolutely.
And she was stupid the way she responded to it.
And people before her were stupid at doing it the same
way. Yes.
But
I mean, it was not yet. So he's charged with doing that investigation. And my colleague on the court, Barry Anderson, I got to give him full credit for this concept. He says, Paul, you got to tell people that they need to know the rule of holes. And what is the rule of holes? He said, once you dug yourself in a hole, stop digging. Well, Comey started digging himself in a hole when he made this statement that in July there was nothing there on the emails, nothing to go forward. But then he went beyond what his mandate was and made some statements that were really improper. So he started digging himself in a hole. And so then what does he continue to do is that about 10 days, 12 days before the election, he comes out with this memo, which was, I think, in violation of the Hatch Act. And I got good authority on that.
I do too, because public employees cannot be involved in the political system.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, Trump is going through that with his son-in-law right now, a different type of thing where he wants his son-in-law to be an employee. But yes,
there's a professor at the university who was Bush's ethics advisor,
and he moved.
He filed
to
a
have
complaint.
him. Yes, right.
And so now, then what does Comey do again? He comes out with a second thing just shortly before the election. I mean, please, the FBI is an institution that's been trying to restructure its reputation after Herbert Hoover, or after J. Edgar Hoover, and whatever. And he has, and I think of all those good people in the FBI who now will carry the burden of their director having...
And some not good people who were leaking a lot of information. Again, in violation of the Hack Act to the Republicans.
But this is a surrealistic aspect of it. Comey is charged with finding out determining whether Hillary Clinton had any violation. He comes up with the conclusion, no. But what does he do? In the process, he is the one who actually violates the law. That is just so weird and strange. But it will be interesting to see what happens from the Trump administration, because they're facing. And on 60 Minutes, he rightfully at this time backed off and said, that'll come at some future time. But that will be one of the ways that his administration will be judged.
At the moment, Trump is overwhelmed.
Oh, gosh,
he has
yes.
4,000 jobs to fill. He has to come up with U.S. attorneys all over the country. I mean,
160 some, I think.
Traditionally, these people all hand in their resignations as the
And they will.
right as the National Defense head did yesterday, and those positions are open. These are important positions, and they must be filled. Now, it looks like they're starting to get their act together and
they
making
will.
a move. And it looks like disreputable people, and I say that really knowledgeably, like Giuliani and who was the other one who surfaced again like a serpent?
Bolton?
Well, Bolton is beyond the pale. But
Well, here's the thing, and in Minnesota in particular, we have a U.S. District Attorney, Andy Lugar, who has been superb in dealing with the Somali relations and keeping it. One of the dangerous things about doing the anti-Somali, and I mean, there was a high school principal who spoke, who's got many Somalis in his school, said, "Mr. Trump, don't come to Minnesota and denigrate our Somali citizens," and he was very upset about that, and I applaud him for that. But what will happen is that there's a lot of braggadocio and bravado. It said, well, we're going to suppress him or whatever. Actually, the outcome of that is going to raise the level of dissent and possibly, so the
just
counterproductive end is we are in a dangerous time, possibly promoted by what may be
and
happening.
he has a chance to do something about it. I only hope he does. The other one I was thinking of was Newt Gingrich, and fortunately it doesn't look like he's going anyplace either. So we've been talking with Judge Paul Anderson, and it's been a wide-ranging discussion. We rarely go for an hour, but I think we could do another hour easily. But message to the
Keep an
voters.
open mind. That's one of our messages.
Keep an open mind. What
Give
can
the
you-
president-elect a chance
What can you do?
and be active.
You can be active locally. You can support the American Civil Liberties Union, which supports you. You
No,
can,
I'm going to tell you,
the Southern Poverty Law
or
Center.
a group like the Institute of Justice, which comes from the conservative libertarian side, who are out there protecting the rights of individual people. And so there's a broad base of entities that should be supported.
Become familiar with the Council on American Islamic Relations right here in Minnesota, or attend one of their functions, or sign up with them to show that you don't condone what we have gone through in this traumatic election. Planned Parenthood. And a lot of people may not agree with that, but keep active. Keep hopeful. Keep speaking out. Become an activist in your community. And you got 24 seconds to sign us off.
Thomas Jefferson. He said, I know of no better repository for the power of a republic like the American Republic than the people themselves. If you don't trust them with the vote, the answer is not to take the vote away, but to educate them. One of the other things is we have to work and have an educated voting class.
Thank you so much.
Yes. A pleasure, sir.